I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up.
Open the strait. Let ships pass. No tolls, no discrimination. Let trade resume. Let the global economy breathe.
UN diplomats call for an end to the standoff at the critical Strait of Hormuz.
Civilians continue to bear the brunt of the ongoing violence.
6 months into a ceasefire, concern grows over conditions on the ground in Gaza.
The forum is really important because it brings indigenous peoples to voice the concerns that they have and to bring attention to it.
A conversation on issues affecting indigenous populations as the UN hosts a key forum. Next.
The recent standoff over the Strait of Hormuz highlighted some of the pressing concerns over maritime security issues. This week, the Security Council discussed security on the seas.
Safe and unimpeded passage is an economic and humanitarian imperative. The economic shock has been immediate, and everyone is paying the price.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres emphasized the global impact of the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. Passage through the waterway has been impeded since early March because of the conflict between the U.S. and Iran. Food and fuel prices have surged around the world as a result. Humanitarian deliveries have also been impacted.
Any disruption to shipping represents a global interference to energy and food security. The principle of freedom of navigation is not negotiable. Ships must be allowed to trade worldwide unhindered and in accordance to international law.
1/5 of global oil and liquefied natural gas and 1/3 of internationally traded fertilizers typically pass through the Strait of Hormuz. The current disruption has led to the worst supply chain tie-ups since the COVID pandemic. It has also left thousands of commercial ships and more than 20,000 seafarers stuck. UN officials called for an end to the standoff.
I appeal to the parties. Open the strait. Let ships pass. No tolls, no discrimination. Let trade resume. Let the global economy breathe.
The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has held for 6 months, but UN officials say it is increasingly fragile. Continued attacks and tensions in the wider Middle East region threaten the agreement. There's also concern over conditions inside Gaza, where humanitarian needs mount amid the damage from years of conflict.
Civilians continue to bear the brunt of the ongoing violence. According to the Ministry of Health in Gaza, since the ceasefire began, approximately 800 Palestinians, including more than 200 children, and 7 humanitarian personnel have been killed as a result of Israeli strikes, shelling, and gunfire. The Israel Defense Forces has stated that its strikes have targeted Hamas militants and facilities. Meanwhile, the humanitarian needs on the ground remain overwhelming. Some 1.8 million people, nearly the entire population of Gaza, are displaced and living in IDP camps and are dependent on aid amid ongoing hostilities, devastated infrastructure, and rising public health risks.
The current situation stands at a critical stage of transition from war to peace. China urges all parties to seize this window of peace, exercise utmost restraint, demonstrate maximum sincerity, and remain steadfast in the direction of a political settlement to prevent any retrogression in the momentum of the ceasefire negotiations, and strive for the early restoration of stability in the Middle East and the Gulf region.
Haiti is facing a crisis of security, hunger, and displacement. Gangs still control much of the capital, Port-au-Prince, and violence is driving a devastating humanitarian challenge.
Almost 1.5 million people are internally displaced, mostly because of violence, and an estimated 6.4 million Haitians will require humanitarian assistance in 2026. Behind these figures are communities under immense strain, where insecurity and humanitarian needs are increasingly intertwined.
But new officials say there are signs of progress in Haiti. Authorities have reclaimed some territory from gangs, and a new UN-backed gang suppression force, or GSF, is hoping to make further progress on the security front.
The mission is taking shape in a structured and deliberate manner. A deployment plan has been developed in consultation with the Haitian authorities, focused on priority areas and leveraging the specialized capabilities of contributing forces. The objective is clear: to degrade the operational capacity of gangs to a level that Haitian institutions can sustainably manage, thereby creating the time and space necessary for the state to reassert its authority.
The conflict in Sudan has raged for 3 years. More than 50 people are killed each day. The conflict drags on, and it is also the world's largest displacement crisis.
In Darfur, children are being killed and maimed, uprooted from their homes, and pushed into extreme hunger, disease, and trauma. What we're seeing is also an intensity in the use of drones, drone strikes against humanitarian infrastructure, humanitarian convoy. We've had multiple cases over the last several months. We've had the feeling that no place is safe.
The United Nations is undergoing reforms with an eye towards the future. The Pact for the Future and UN80 initiative are guiding the changes. UN officials say the goal is a more efficient body that can better handle the challenges of a rapidly evolving world.
The Pact for the Future and UN80 are interconnecting components of a simple strategy of renewal. Together, they are designed to renew the vision and machinery of multilateralism so the UN can further deliver with credibility and impact today and for generations to come.
Let's take a look at some of the other issues on the UN's agenda. The president of the UN General Assembly traveled to Asia. In China, Annalena Baerbock met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Wang Yi said this is a time to support and reinvigorate the UN and the multilateral system.
There's a deepening hunger and malnutrition crisis in South Sudan. 7.8 million people are unable to find enough food to eat during the lean season.
Conflict, displacement, and economic shocks are driving a food security crisis in South Sudan. 56% of the country's population is acutely food insecure. Some parts of the country are in danger of famine. More than 1.2 million people are expected to face acute hunger this year in Lebanon. The conflict between Israel and Hezbollah has exacerbated humanitarian needs. Memorial services were held for a UNIFIL peacekeeper who died from injuries suffered in an attack. Corporal Rico Pramudia hailed from Indonesia. He is one of 6 UNIFIL peacekeepers killed in Lebanon since March.
Coming up,
I think any opportunity to bring in indigenous young people is so important.
UN Insider.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy, your money has a story to tell. Because every business story is a human story. Global Business.
Over the last 2 weeks of April, indigenous leaders from around the world have gathered at the UN for the annual Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. This year's theme centered on health. I sat down with Aluki Koterik, chair of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Some of the conversations, the themes that you're really focused on during this period is health and healthcare, specifically around certain issues. But let's start with conflict, healthcare and conflict. How does that play a role in indigenous communities?
So one of the things that we do as a permanent forum members, all 16 members are expert independent members, and we come together and we decide on different themes. So this year it's indigenous peoples and health, including in the context of conflict, because we recognize the state of many places right now where there's conflict. But I also know that we've talked about conflict, not only military conflict, but also conflict as broader between the different worldviews, for instance. So I think we were trying to be really broad about what that theme is so that people can come to the forum and talk about it in the way it resonates with them.
What are some examples, especially maybe from where you're from?
So I'm an Inuk from the Arctic, from the Canadian Arctic, and we had the opening this year, and I think it was especially special. For me, I was so proud to be sitting at the podium when the Governor General of Canada came up to speak. And I was so proud because she's the first Indigenous Governor General of Canada. And not only she's the first Indigenous woman Governor General, but she's an Inuk. So she's able to speak Inuktitut that I speak. And so it felt even more incredible that I was sitting there watching her address a hall full of Indigenous peoples from all 7 social cultural regions. And she talked about health, and she talked about mental health. She talked about the need to ensure that Indigenous peoples communities, Indigenous peoples have health professionals that speak their language, that understand their culture. And she shared a story about a young Inuk from her home community who had traveled. And it's the case with so many Indigenous peoples around the world that so many of us have to travel away from where we live, from our communities and our family and our support system to be able to further our formal education. And so they've spent many years away from their home so that they can become a doctor. And the reason they want to be a doctor is so that they can provide health services in their own language and be able to provide much more comfort to the patient, because the patient would know that they understand their culture and who they are, and they don't have to explain that.
There's also the issue of access. You know, you mentioned Indigenous not only traveling so far for the education, but also to receive care.
That's very true. In so many places around the world, people have to go to big cities to be able to access specialized health systems. For example, in the Arctic where I'm from, and I'm just going to use it as an example because that's what I know best, many family members, community members have to travel by plane miles away to be able to go to to go to a hospital. Many of our communities do not have hospitals. And so you can imagine the culture shock in a state when you're not feeling well, that not only are you trying to feel better and you're hoping the system will help you feel better, but you're now in a place that you don't really understand. People are speaking a language that maybe you don't understand, and you're eating foods that you're not accustomed to. So it's a total change, which kind of is counterintuitive in terms of trying to care for someone. So it creates lots of challenges.
Are those situations improving? Is there progress being made when it comes to healthcare and access?
I think spaces like the forum is really important because it brings Indigenous peoples to voice the concerns that they have and to bring attention to it. And I think when there's lots of Indigenous peoples advocating for better services, better programming in the 7 social cultural regions, it makes improvements.
There's also the issue of health when it comes to climate change. And as we know, so many Indigenous communities around the world are on the front lines of impacts of climate change on their lands and where they live.
I'm so happy you bring that up because I think climate change has such a big impact on, for example, Indigenous food systems. And I will say that many indigenous populations are struggling with food security, but I think that could be addressed if we start reincorporating and strengthening the indigenous food systems that already exist. We know that there's been studies that show indigenous foods. So when I say that, I'm thinking in all the different environments. In locally are more nutrient rich for peoples, and often are the preferred foods of indigenous peoples anyway. So I think we've made a mistake, and to some extent, as indigenous peoples, as we work towards modernization and the different things that have come into our communities, we start adopting things that are not necessarily from our communities. And we think that because we've been colonized often, that we sometimes think that's better. But I think we're going now in the opposite direction and saying, no, actually, what we know and how we have lived is actually precisely how we need to live here in our current, in our local environment. And that's, I mean, climate change will have an impact on that, because with the ice melting, for instance, hunters might, when they go seal hunting, might find treacherous ice that they may not have in the past when there was no climate change. And that might be the same with indigenous peoples that grow crops. Maybe there's less water, and so there's a drought, and it's impacting on the fields or crops that they were growing.
When it comes to indigenous peoples and political representation, we see you, of course. We see the country of Colombia, who has a permanent representative here at the United Nations who is indigenous. We also see what happened at COP30 with Brazil having its indigenous minister presiding over a large section of that summit, a seat at the table. Can you talk about progress there?
Well, I'm always astounded how much progress there is, because my father's generation, so in living history, he's still alive. In living history, he was living out on the land, not in a community, not in a city, and didn't speak English, And so in a very short time frame, Inuit have learned a new language, have learned a new government system, have learned new formal education systems, new healthcare systems, and despite all those changes, have stepped up and said, oh, we now know how this system works, we will take up space. And so I look at the political leaders where I'm from, and I think about that, and I'm so astounded. And I feel so re-energized when I come to the forum and I see indigenous peoples from all over the globe. And I know every single one of them has a story of how they came to that forum, and they have role models as well in their own regions of indigenous leaders who have paved the way. And each of us, I think, are working just a little bit to try and pave the way even a little bit farther, knowing we're not going to be able to achieve everything, but we move it a little bit at a time.
As the United Nations prepares to select its next Secretary General, what are you looking for in terms of support for that next leader to engage with the Indigenous Peoples Forum and with Indigenous peoples around the world?
Well, I think the next leader will be so important that they're very open to meeting with Indigenous peoples, that they're very supportive of the 3 mechanisms on Indigenous peoples within the UN system, and they think about proactive ways in which they can amplify Indigenous people's voices. In addition, I think any opportunity to bring in Indigenous young people is so important, because so many of us are from places that have small populations. And so to participate effectively and fully in international UN systems, it's important for us to start observing and attending these spaces so that we don't feel intimidated and we feel like we can make positive and rich contributions.
Chairperson Aluki Kutuk, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
UN Insider.
Modern vitality, born of ancient civilizations. Asia exemplifies diversity in its best sense and welcomes changes at the fastest pace. Asia Today brings you the headlines from the most populous continent, puts in focus politics, economies, and faces, and takes you on a tour of the sights from the region and beyond.
Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point.
Rethinking traditional practices can often lead to more sustainable ways to fill everyday needs. In Brazil, some are turning to alternative farming practices that are sending crops growing in a new direction.
The greater São Paulo area is home to over 20 million people who work, play, and each of them needs to eat. The city has one of the biggest food distribution hubs in the world, called CEAGESP. Every year, it handles more than 3 million tons of food from more than 1,000 Brazilian cities and 25 countries. About 60% of the fruits and vegetables consumed in São Paulo must first pass through this massive warehouse that operates around the clock.
People in the city eat a lot of vegetables, but grow very little.
São Paulo's dependence on long, complex food supply chains is why Professor Renata Priori perked up when one of her students, for her final project, proposed building a vertical farm in the city.
We had few references in Brazil, which made it harder for students to understand the technical side. The challenge was to design something with form, aesthetics, and technique, while also making it productive for growing fresh food.
Laura Gundim's thesis, entitled Urban Agriculture Cluster, Architecture as a Productive System, took the idea of a vertical farm a step further, turning it into a fully functioning building. It's a public space that combines hydroponic food production and education. The project, set on a busy street in São Paulo, is addressing food access issues and climate change. It was even selected for the UN's academic guide for the 2030 Agenda, a global plan built around 17 goals, including ending poverty and hunger, and making cities more inclusive and sustainable. About 5 kilometers away, in a residential area with some of São Paulo's most vibrant restaurants, Paulo Bresciani is working towards his mission to bring planting closer to eating. When Bresciani read about vertical farms in Japan, the US, and Singapore, it was easy to imagine how they could help in São Paulo.
I even traveled to the US, Belgium, and Sweden to visit farms. I gathered references and adapted what was needed to build a similar system here in Brazil.
In 2019, he launched Fazenda Cubo, an indoor vertical farm that allows customers to buy vegetables directly from the place that grows them. Fazenda Cubo grows everything using hydroponics, a technique where plants grow in trays without any soil and absorb nutrients from mineral-rich water.
In the growing area, we use two different hydroponic systems, one for starting seedlings and another for the final stage, from seedling to harvest. Each tray has small holes underneath so water rises to moisten the roots while keeping the leaves dry. Under each growing shelf or module, there's a tank. Here's where the water mixed with mineral salts and nutrients is stored. It gets pumped up through the back, flows along the channel past the plant roots, then drains back into the tank and keeps circulating like that.
E aí, por essa tubulação, ele cai de volta no tanque e fica assim, recirculando.
Fazenda Cubo says its system uses up to 90% less water than traditional farming. In just 65 square meters, Fazenda Cubo produces microgreens, herbs, leafy greens, and up to 400 kilos of lettuce each month, the same as a conventional farm 10 to 20 times bigger. Nearby restaurants receive weekly deliveries harvested just a few kilometers away.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN insider.